legally,
Pleasure to be here.
what's the strongest case that Musk can make, and what's the strongest legal case that Twitter can make?
I think everyone agrees that Twitter has the much stronger legal case. Their case is he can't complain about all these risks because he assumed them. He could have done due diligence back before he signed the deal on the bots. He could have put representations and warranties into the contract. He did none of that, and therefore he's deemed to assume the risk. Musk is saying that, well, this is a huge risk, but actually it's not a material adverse effect because there's been no change. Whatever that percentage of bots is, which no one knows, it's not something you can show has changed in a way that materially worsens his position from what it was before when he didn't investigate them. Now, behind all this, I've got to point out, there is a mystery. We all agree, every professor, every practitioner, that Twitter's case is stronger. But if that's true, why hasn't the Twitter stock come up significantly? It fell last night to under $33. $33 versus the $54.20 that Musk has offered. If the Delaware court is going to order him to perform his deal, it's going to give Pacific Performance, he's going to have to pay $54.20, and all the ARBs are missing something by not buying the stock in the interim, up to 40, 45, maybe even higher. And that's the mystery.
Makes you wonder, Professor, it makes you wonder what it's worth if, on a standalone basis, what the business would be worth. Maybe there's significant downside that is offsetting that risk, the upside,
Sure.
But I hear what you're saying. Nobody
sure
can quite
is,
figure out.
If you're an investor and Delaware is going to order him to pay you $54.20, you don't have a long-term view about Twitter. You're going to take the money and run.
Do you think that is really going to happen, though? Do you think that is the most likely outcome? Because if it's not, and I appreciate what everybody says about the stronger hand, but if the ultimate result is that we still get a negotiated deal, i.e. that we settle, then that price is probably a bit too high.
I think that is quite correct, but I think the market is predicting what the negotiation will be. Understand that 54.20 to 33 that's like a $15-17 billion difference. It's a huge amount to be at stake in one litigation. And I think the real concern is whether or not Delaware will grant something called specific performance. Specific performance is like an injunction. It requires you to perform the deal as it was originally contracted and not just to pay damages.
Right. Professor?
As long as to pay damages, it's much less.
Is there precedence for Delaware doing that? I'm just trying to understand how a court can force somebody to plop down like $33 billion of their own money and force them to buy a company. What's the precedent?
Well, courts are good at that. If you disobey an injunction, you are in contempt, and the court can use a number of remedies of someone who's in contempt. It is rare, but they can send someone to prison until he does comply with the court's order. That happens. Journalists do get sent to prison when they refuse to testify, when they have valuable evidence that the prosecution wants. So while I say it's very rare, Mr. Musk is the one person I can think of who can be so flamboyantly defiant that a court might do that. He can't continue to present himself as above the law, which is the image he usually gives. So we're going to be watching not just the arguments in court, but what the market price is doing. Because if the market price of Twitter starts coming up, it suggests that the market either has learned that the negotiations are getting closer to a deal, and maybe what the deal is, or that they think that this will go to a decision and the court's going to impose specific performance on them. It's going to be a day-by-day negotiation, both in court and in the private negotiations.
I'm just trying to work out what the impact on Twitter would be if Elon Musk was in jail. That would certainly change the narrative online.
I don't think Mr. Musk, I don't think he'll like jail. I think pretty quickly he'll decide he will comply. But what's always said about someone who's put to jail for contempt is that the prisoner holds the courthouse keys in his hands. All he's got to do is comply. And if he starts complying, which he can do, although it would really destroy the price of Tesla if he has to make those kind of sales, he can get himself out of jail. I don't think he's been in jail like it.
Yeah, this is a pretty extreme scenario we're painting here. Professor, just talk me through how you would, if you were Twitter and you were trying to get the best deal for your shareholders, presumably you wouldn't want to take any deal too low a price because you'd expose yourself to legal risk there as well.
Shareholders could sue
let's
you
assume,
if you
but let's
gave in.
assume that, yeah, let's assume that you couldn't. Let's assume you didn't think you're going to get the 54 as well. How do you run it internally? Do you think you've got a negotiating team, you've got a legal team? How much interplay do you think there would be between those two teams?
Well, they can talk to each other, but usually they're going to keep their own negotiations going. I think, by the way, the board is protected by the business judgment rule. If they decide the best deal they can get is $47, I don't think a court is going to second guess them. But they got to do something. They can't sit there with the price of 33 and not sue, and they got to pursue that suit.